There's a lot of confusion today. There are some 100 versions of the Word of God. Now, I didn't need a theological degree to know that that is nothing but a problem. But we got people in pulpits that can't figure that out. Now, the people outside the church, they read those versions, and they know those versions are different one from another. Two stories I could relate to you. I was at Covenant Seminary one time, and there was a young man going through the seminary, and he had two different versions in his hands, and I said, you know, those two books are saying two entirely different things. And he said, well, if you go back in the Greek, and I said, hold it. I don't speak Greek, and I don't speak Hebrew. I speak English. The people outside the church, that's exactly what they speak. They speak English. And I said, those two books are saying two entirely different things. We opened up both versions and picked a verse, seemingly at random, and we read the verse in both versions. And he looked at the one, and then he looked at the other, and he said, you know, those are saying different things. I said, yes, they are. Another incident, I was at a McDonald's, and there was a young lady that worked at the McDonald's. I said, can I give you a tract? And she said, yes. And I gave her this tract. Let's see if we could get this up to the camera here. Whoops. Can you see it? I can't quite see it. It says, what did God say? One Bible. She read the tract, and she broke down in tears. She said, you're wonderful. She had 3 versions of the Bible at her house, and she didn't know which one to read. She was smart enough to know all 3 of those were different. And she was confused. And this confusion has been going on today. And we have people in the pulpits that don't understand it. They don't understand the confusion. They don't understand what people are going through. Consequently, they can't minister to the people because they don't understand it. It's a massive confusion. Let me read a little bit of this tract here for you. The oldest problem that mankind has known was not sin. The oldest problem was 2 versions of the Word of God right in the Garden of Eden. It's a problem that plagues the church in the day we live in. It's a problem that causes confusion and contention and even splits churches. It's a problem that Satan himself is happy to have. Now, in the garden, like I said, we had 2 versions, but it's all labeled for us. We have what God said, and then we had what Satan said. It's all labeled. We don't have labels. When I look at people, it talks about the name, number, mark of the beast and being in somebody's forehead. Well, I don't see any number in anybody's forehead. We're not labeled like that. The scriptures are labeled so that we can put these principles to use. So, what was the end product of having 2 different versions in the Garden of Eden? What was the end product? The fall of man. All these versions have no good going to come from them. The only way, here you get into a church, and the people that are sitting in the church, they got one version. Then you got a preacher in the pulpit, and he's reading from another version. And he said, what did he just say? I thought, I have no idea what he said, because my Bible don't say that. And you're not going to have peace in a church. You're not going to have peace in evangelism unless you have one version. I said there was some 100 versions in the English language. Well, let me give you some more examples. Let me give you some more knowledge about these versions and things like that. There's two Greek texts. One is the received text. It was taken from some 5,000 versions. Then there's the Westcott and Hort, which was basically taken from only two. The two were the guiding light, as it were, because they said they were older versions. One was the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text was found in a burn pit. Now, if you understand how things went back then, they didn't have printing presses. So what they had to do is just copy the Word of God from one papyrus to another. And if they made a mistake, they didn't have an eraser. What they did was burn the copy. The Masoretic text was found in a burn pit. So why didn't these better versions, as it were, why didn't they find ones as old or older? Well, if they had a good version, they wore it out on a pulpit, preaching from it, and then they had to keep translating. I've had Bibles. I've worn out a couple, 2 or 3 Bibles, and just out of use, you wear them out. Well, that's what's happened back then. Then there was another version found in the Vatican, the Vaticanus. The Pope hated the scriptures in that sense. They read them, but they hated them nevertheless. So that was the Westcott and Hort. If you compare the Westcott and Hort with the received text, the difference with the Westcott and Hort, there's some 2,920 changes and omissions. That's just in the Greek text, 2,922. And that's before you translate it into English. The Westcott and Hort is owned by a secular company. They could care less what God said. There's some 98 versions that came from the Westcott and Hort. Now, again, I don't need a theological degree to know that you cannot have 98 honest translations of the scriptures. Words mean something. So you got the 2,922 errors and omissions. Then it's done into English, and all they care about, what does this secular company care about? The only thing they care about is selling books. A dollar bill is their whole point of reference. That's all they care about. And yet people are quoting from these new versions. The best English version we have to date, to this very day, is the King James Version. Number 2 is the New King James Version. But even in the New King James Version, there's some 1,100 places it's obvious they did not go back to the original text. Number 3 is any of these new versions, these new ones. That's way down the list. My suggestion to anybody, get yourself a King James Version. But why are these people quoting from these modern versions? Well, there's different reasons. I would hope it isn't because they're just downright lazy. You got a word, and they say this is a better word than the word in the King James Version. I hope you're not just going, instead of going back to the original language, using these tools. We have the Greek and the Hebrew. God raised men up to preserve the Greek and the Hebrew. These are dead languages. Now, this is an important understanding. A dead language, what it does is preserves the meaning of the words. A living language will change over time, but a dead language preserves the meaning of the words, and God did that. We have it in the Greek and the Hebrew. So that's the way people ought to go back. I hope they're just not taking a modern version and just making the assumption, oh, it's just like the King James, it's just they got a better word for it or whatever. And it could be a synonym, and synonyms do not always work when we're talking about the Word of God. It doesn't always work. Might work sometimes, it doesn't always work. So I hope it's not out of laziness. We've got tools. Strong's Concordance is an excellent tool. That man worked on that project so that we could have it, so we could see what it is in the Greek and the Hebrew. You got this word. You say that's the right word. How do you know that? You only know it from the Greek and the Hebrew. Why not give honor to these people? Why not give honor to the people that gave us the Greek and the Hebrew text? Why would you give honor to some version from a secular company that all they care about is a dollar bill, and they just plaster anything in there? Why would you do that? Do you understand what kind of turmoil you cause? Do you understand the confusion you cause? In the book of Nehemiah, it says that they had read the Word of God, and the man gave the sense of the reading. That's the job of a preacher. We can't have lazy preachers in pulpits. The damage is there. Just like that young lady that was in that McDonald's. She didn't know what Bible to read. My whole point of bringing this up is that so somebody can pick up the Word of God, pick up their King James Version, and have confidence that they're reading the Word of God, and not be confused, to have a place of peace that they may start their learning about who God is, who we are, understand our condition, and come to know the Lord in saving faith. I want them to have confidence in the Word of God. And they can't do it with all these versions. That temptation must be stood against. The number one reason I hear people going to these modern versions, they talk about the King James Version. They said nobody talks like that anymore. Well, we have the Greek and the Hebrew. They're dead languages. Nobody talks like that anymore. What are we going to do? Destroy those? And yet people attack the King James Version and give them a more corrupt version in its place. Oh, nobody talks like that anymore. That's the job of the preacher. In Nehemiah, it says they read from the Word of God distinctly and gave the sense. That's the job of the preacher. Let's not be carried away by every notion that comes in our minds. What do we do when we find somebody with one of these modern versions? Well, first of all, you don't take it away from them. There is light in those versions. It's not the best of light, but it's light, and God can use it. But that doesn't justify preaching from these versions. When God finds us, He finds us in sin, but redeeming us, being born again, and then sanctify us, He brings us out of sin. Well, the same thing is true about the Word of God. God brings us from darkness into light. So that's what God does. I know one man, he started off and he had a paraphrase Bible. Well, he doesn't read that today. He reads a King James Version. I know another man that started off with a New International Version. He doesn't read it today. He reads the King James Version. He was brought into a better light. If you know somebody that's got one of these versions, you don't want to take it away from them, but if you can, give them a King James Version. And should they embrace it, then they can retire that modern version, which I believe to be corrupted in many ways. I hear preachers that say, well, this word in this modern version is better than in the King James Version. Well, what's the implication? The implication is that modern version is better than the King James Version. That's the implication. When exactly the opposite is true. The King James Version has got more right than it's got wrong. And those modern versions has got more wrong than it's got right. They attack the deity of Christ. They attack the blood of Christ. They diminish the punishment of hell. That's what they do. Because the men that put them together, that's the way they thought. I just hope that this message resonates with you and gives you more guidance when you're dealing with others and even with yourself, that you learn better. Thank you. Add a like to help more people find it on the web. I see myself as a link in the chain of salvation. Damnation is forever. Salvation is of the Lord, and God is pleased to use us in this effort. It may be that the Lord will use something that you or I say that will bring someone to the knowledge of his need for Christ's forgiveness. Share with others, and subscribe for more videos.